Well, I'm Alan Dale from Gale Force Winds. It's great to be here with our friends at Ocean Advance. This is, of course, the inaugural Innovation Waves Conference. And I want to tell you, good things are happening, great conversations, a true collaboration, government, industry, academia, everybody coming together, seize the opportunities at the moment. Love meeting these folks one by one. Please introduce yourself, tell us what you do.
Hi, Alan, and all the Gale Force Wind watchers. My name is Tom Cooper, and I'm a professor of strategic management at the Faculty of Business Administration.
Okay, talk to me about your role there at the university. What are you trying to instill in the next generation?
Wow, Alan, that's a big question.
Yeah.
I'm trying to instill a whole bunch of things, but in respect to this conference, Alan, it's really around innovation, place-based learning, the understanding of the importance of the oceans that are just all around us. I think it's one of the things that we take for granted here in Atlantic Canada, the importance of the ocean, the importance of what that means, not only from the crisis that we're going through in terms of the environment, but also the opportunities, whether it's the opportunities in defense, which you have had great experience in, the opportunities in terms of aquaculture, tourism, just all the different things that are going on in and around oceans, innovation, and how, from a business school perspective, how do I get my students to think about that, where they can create careers, they can create businesses, they can create opportunities, not only for themselves, but to continue to live in this amazing place that we like to call St. John's, Newfoundland, and the wider province and the wider region of Atlantic Canada.
Doctor, you're at all of these events, you're in all the conversations, you're often speaking at them, moderating panels. You see a tremendous amount of opportunity. How are you able to pass that on to your students? I mean, there's so much opportunity and you see it. How do you pass that on?
I think Alan, it's having that conversation in terms of what is the opportunity. Like the other part of Gale Force Winds, Jerry Carew, always likes to post the video of the great late Jeff Sterling talking about opportunities back in 1992, and I was in on that meeting. And sometimes it's one thing. He was talking about water at the time, and we would take water for granted. Like there's no such thing as a bottled water back in 1992. But wow, like, things change, right? And I think for me, it's really, Alan, trying to talk about how, in my lifetime, how the world has changed, and it's really hard for me to fathom the degree of change that my students are going to experience in the next 25 years. What I can tell them, though, that living in a place like Atlantic Canada and living in a place like St. John's, Newfoundland, gives them so many opportunities that you probably wouldn't even get in a place like Toronto or New York, even London, in terms of that. Not only work-life balance, which I think we're really good at, but also in terms of what's coming down the pipeline, in terms of thinking about how do we develop more resilient infrastructure around the climate crisis that we're in. How do we start to talk about the impact that businesses make from an environmental, social, and governance standpoint? How do we get people interested and excited about not only the career opportunity, but also the entrepreneurial opportunities in and around oceans? And that's one of the reasons I'm on the panel today, which we were talking about. How does industry collaborate with academia to really kind of go beyond sometimes the ideation? I got this idea to where you're looking at the feasibility, and then you're looking at the commercialization, and that whole spectrum in terms of what's going on. It's okay to fail. Failure happens all the time. Yeah. We've all had some sort of failures, but the biggest failure is at least not starting something and not trying to think through the opportunities.
Dr. Dual-use technology used a lot in the conversations of late. From an academic lens, what's that mean to you?
To me, when I look at dual-use technology, is that you can use it for one perspective. For example, you can be using it for defense, but also you can get that data and then start to do some really cool things in terms of whether it's ocean mapping, whether it's looking at temperature, whether it's looking at a whole bunch of other different areas. And Alan, for me, it's not maybe even dual use. It could be multiple different uses of the technology that you're going into. And sometimes, like a technology that you may be using for one sector may have a wholly different opportunity in a different sector. And this is really where the importance of coming to the conferences like this, talking to smart people other than myself in industry and in government and in academia, and saying, okay, well, I know about this that's occurring in the mining sector. I wonder if we can bring that over and look at what's going on in the ocean sector and maybe use that technology. So it's not dual purpose just in terms of I can get that data and use it for something else, or I can get that technology and maybe apply to another part of an ecosystem. To me, it's kind of going even beyond that, going into other ecosystems and going into other perspectives.
You know, I equally know you to be a strategic thinker in terms of looking at things on a macro level. You've got a federal government with a fresh mandate. You've got a provincial government with a fresh mandate. You have many municipal governments in this province with fresh mandates. Talk to me about where the opportunity exists there for industry and academia to work together with all of these new mandates swirling around, everybody looking at growth.
I think it's the messaging that we've heard at the federal government side has been very much in terms of defense, which you have some very deep knowledge of. And the defense is because we're paying catch up, and also because of what's happening in the United States, but also geopolitically. When we look at the opening of the Arctic and we look at all the things that are going on, whether it's China or Russia or a whole bunch of countries are looking at the Arctic and saying, we should have part of that, but it is Canadian. So that notion of sovereignty becomes really important. I think the second thing, that's an easy one, but also the federal government is talking about how do we expand into different markets? How do we go into places like Europe? How do we go into places like Southeast Asia? Excuse me, Al.
Yeah.
And so when we look at those different sectors, we suddenly start to say, okay, can we use that technology we've developed here in Atlantic Canada, and can we go into Europe? Can we go into Southeast Asia? Can we go into the Pacific? Thank you. And look into those different markets, really learn from that. One of the great success stories, if we look at oil and gas, for example, and all the technology that's been, and processes and methodologies and good practices, we've translated that from Newfoundland and Labrador down to places like Guyana in South America. And what a great success story for Newfoundland and Labrador companies and Atlantic Canadian companies. So if we can start to do that, if we can take that one great example and start to apply that to a whole bunch of other different territories, which is what the Carney government is in, man, that's going to be awesome. On the provincial government side, there's challenges from a financial and budgetary standpoint. What I hope the provincial government is going to be open to is making sure that it's not just all about healthcare. Healthcare is super important, but is also looking at how do we make this a place in 30, 40 years ago that people and businesses are attracted to, and finding what I would say is a cluster of industries and companies that are really world class. And on the municipal side is once again being open to whether it's from a land use perspective and asset management perspective, making sure that once again they contribute to the ecosystem as well. So I think it's very much kind of that triple access in looking at government, academia, and industry all working together to really once again make this and continue to make this an amazing place to live, work, and play.
Doctor, I've always enjoyed your optimism. Whenever you talk, you're certainly optimistic about the future, indeed passionate about where Newfoundland and Labrador is going. And I think on many occasions I've asked you, what do you tell your students about the opportunities that exist before them? But I kind of want to flip that question a little bit. I'd like you now to speak to the industry and say, the students that are coming out are capable of the work in front of them. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have amazing students, Alan, and I especially have a lot of amazing international students. And I would really challenge industry, and I ask them all the time, is that we got these great students at Memorial University. How can you take advantage of them, and not take advantage of them, but how can you start to utilize them into your business model? It's tough if you're in industry these days. If you're tough for your company, you got to make sure that you guys know, like in terms of the bottom line, making sure you pay yourself a good salary and bring people on and use the technology and invest. But investing also includes investing in people. And there's so many different programs and even if you just want to try a student out and say, are they a good fit? Whether it's through MyTax or whether it's through the cooperative program at engineering or business or other parts of Memorial University, there's so many opportunities to utilize students. And it's interesting, I know there's been a lot of talk in this conference about artificial intelligence, and one of the things is, I just get ChatGPT to do that for me rather than bringing in a student. And I always challenge companies to say, well, if you take a student and they know how to use ChatGPT or they know how to use generative AI, they can even make your world a much, much quicker, better place. They can be more productive, more effective, and more efficient in terms of meeting your strategic goals. So I would speak to industry is that just remember we have so many great students here, and the more we hire them, the more likely they're going to stay. The more likely they're to stay, the more likely they're going to build the next suite of business and careers and people. And that's why, just because you're maybe not from here, and instead you may be somewhere else, don't be afraid. There's lots of so many great experiences that people are bringing in from outside the region into our universities, and it's just, once again, it's taking giving that opportunity. And that first opportunity, the hardest job I ever got out was my first job. And I think that's one of the things sometimes we forget, is that first job, and getting that first job and making sure that and if a student's not a fit, well then, you tell them, you give them constructive feedback that they're not a fit and maybe they need to focus on maybe a different sector, a different area, but that's valuable in and of itself. And there's, once again, lots of different programs that are out there to help companies in terms of finding those students.
And Doctor, we always appreciate you being on the show.
And I always appreciate Gale Force Winds. One of the great reasons to come to conferences and speak to you folks.
Right, and I'm sure your students appreciate the advocacy that you make for them. There's little doubt they're getting a great education if they're in your orbit. Thanks very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Alan, for having me once again.